For some reason, Raj's Discord is incredibly laggy, so I apologize for the bad lip sync during this episode. Enjoy! Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to a Monday episode of Before Coughing, or as we like to call it here, Mucking Fun Day. That's right, a lot of stuff has happened over the weekend, and even today things are going on. We're going to cover that all, including Russians, Ukraine, as always, because that's still happening. Let's get into our headlines. Today on Before Coffee. Russians seek refuge in East Asia. Record number of asylum applications registered in South Korea.
Western nations meet in Paris to show unity against Russia.
Denmark closes probe into Nord Stream blast, saying there's not enough grounds for a criminal case.
And American consumers are fighting back against high prices.
A white man's war. Calgary Military Museum focuses on Black Canadian soldiers.
That information and more, which is National Pistachio Day, February 26, 2024 on Before Coffee.
All right. Our first news story coming out of Russia and also East Asia. This is from hotnews.ro. Hot news. Hell yeah. In total, 5,750 Russian citizens applied for asylum in South Korea in 2023, according to a report published by the Korean Immigration Service this month. This figure is 5 times higher than in 2022, which was 1,038. And higher than the total number of asylum applications from Russians registered between 1994 and 2019. 2023 also marked the highest total number of asylum applications in at least 8 years, according to the Immigration Service. After the Russians, the most asylum requests came from citizens of Kazakhstan, China, and Malaysia. And the trend continued this year as well, the Russians being the ones who submitted the most asylum requests in January. The most frequent reasons cited by asylum seekers were prosecution based on religion and political prosecution. Other reasons include the discrimination because they are members of a particular social group, race, or nationality. The service did not specify the reasons cited by Russian asylum seekers. South Korea has strict immigration laws, including when it comes to asylum applications. Over the past 3 decades, only 4,052 people have been recognized as refugees in South Korea out of more than 103,000 asylum applications, according to a report. Russian citizens seeking asylum around the world have attracted increased attention since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No kidding. With hundreds and thousands of people leaving Russia in the past 2 years, many of them fleeing conscription, which I don't think is a valid reason. Maybe considered a valid reason to flee the country. Depends on. I don't think Korea would care. Korea also has forced conscription, so they both kind of are in the same basket when it comes to that. In South Korea, 5 Russian men were stranded at Incheon International Airport near the capital in Seoul in 2022 as they tried to escape Moscow's military mobilization order for war. The South Korean Ministry of Justice refused their request for refugee status, effectively leaving them stranded in the airport. Too scared to return to Russia, they spent nearly 5 months sleeping in the terminal and living off food distributed by South Korean Immigration Department. In early 2023, 2 men were allowed to leave the airport. One of the men told CNN that his first plan was to go to Kazakhstan, but he changed his mind when he heard that former Soviet Republic was expelling fleeing Russians. Similar stories have also been told elsewhere. Data from the U.S. border officials showed that the number of Russian citizens they encountered rose sharply after Moscow imposed mandatory military service in September 2022. From October 2022 to February 2023, nearly 22,000 Russians tried to enter the U.S. through the country's southern border, according to U.S. Customs Border and Protection data. That's right, we did a story on that last year, I believe. The Russians who are fleeing to Mexico so that they can flee to the U.S., which is just ironic, right? Because, you know, there's all those, the southern border, you do not expect Russians to be coming from the southern border. But I guess the rumors that everyone flees through the southern border of the U.S. is why people probably getting to Mexico is easier than getting into the U.S. So they go into the U.S. then Mexico first, or any of those countries, right? They could go in any and then walk, like everyone else. Who, this idea that there's people of troves coming through the southern border of the U.S., which is not real, by the way. But there's your story. The Russians most Russians are trying to get away from conscription. So, quote something about how men these days don't know how to fight. But to be fair, I wouldn't want to fight in the war either, because it's just a land reclamation project. It's not an actual, fighting against fascism or something that was happening in World War II, for example. So, I mean, it's the same with Vietnam and Korea. Like, why did those wars happen? Not for good reasons, or at least not for reasons why so many people died in the jungles and got freaking poisoned by chemical warfare. Anyways, on to great Monday topic there. On to your next story.
Okay, I guess we're going to keep talking about Russia.
Hell yeah.
And the Ukraine invasion. This week at Paris gathering, this is according to Associated Press, Sylvie Corbett. I guess that's Sylvie. Yeah, Sylvie Corbett. Western leaders to show unity for Ukraine and signal that Russia cannot win. More than 20 European heads of state and government and other Western officials are gathering to show of unity for Ukraine, signaling to Russia that their support for Kiev isn't wavering as the full-scale invasion grinds into a third year. French President Emmanuel Macron, hosting the conference Monday in Paris, said he wants to discuss strengthening and ways to give credibility to the fact that Russia cannot win in Ukraine. We are at a critical moment, Macron said this weekend. With Ukraine having limited resources, we must reinforce the munitions and military resources what we send. But we must think about how we manage this effort over time and how we ensure that Russia does not win. A top French official said the conference was aimed at making new commitments at the terms of weapon deliveries and financial aid, but rather at better coordinating support for Kiev and ensuring that the promises are kept. The officials spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the conference details and goals. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to attend the via video conference. Macron's office said. The more than 20 European heads of state and government include German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Polish President Andrzej Duda, United States were represented by its top diplomat for Europe, James O'Brien, and the UK by Foreign Secretary David Cameron. European nations are worried that the U.S. will dial back support and aid for Kiev's is teetering in Congress. They also have growing concerns that former U.S. President Donald Trump might return to the White House to allow Russia to expand its aggression on the continent. The Paris conference comes after France, Germany, and UK recently signed a 10-year bilateral agreement with Ukraine to send strong signal long-term backing as Kiev works to shore up Western support. There's your story, your quick one on this morning on the Paris meeting. We'll have some more news in a little bit.
Yep, they're going to be talking and then deciding they're going to do nothing, probably. That's what I expect.
Okay, well, I don't think that's what's happening, but go ahead with your negativity.
All right. Talking about negativity, Denmark
I think they're actually
the probe
doing
into the Nord Stream.
It's not talking, yeah.
Because they don't think there's enough grounds for a criminal case. This is on Sue Today by Jan M. Olsen and the Associated Press. Denmark on Monday joined, I think Monday today, so Denmark on the 26th of February joined Sweden in closing its investigation into the 2022 explosions that damaged the Nord Stream gas pipelines, with authorities saying they concluded there was deliberate sabotage but not sufficient grounds to pursue a criminal case in Denmark. Copenhagen police and the Danish security service, who carried out the investigation together, made the remarks in a joint statement. The Danish authorities said the probe had been both complex and comprehensive, and the Copenhagen police added they were not able to provide further comments. The underwater detonations on the Nord Stream detonations on the Nord Stream gas pipelines, which were built to carry Russia's natural gas to Germany, occurred in international waters but within the Swedish and Danish economic zones. Sweden earlier said that the state actor was the most likely culprit. A state actor was the most likely. So somebody who is a country did it. Congratulations, no kidding. It wasn't some random crazy guy who was like, let me just get some explosives and blow up a pipeline. Denmark's investigation was one of 3 in the explosion. Sweden spiked its probe on February 7th on the grounds that Swedish jurisdictions does not apply, saying the investigation's primary purpose was to establish whether Sweden or its citizens somehow were involved. Swedish officials also said they handed over to Germany material that can be used in evidence in a German investigation. Germany still needs to make public its conclusions on the detonations. The German Federal Prosecutor's Office said Monday, February 26th, that the German investigation continues and they won't provide more information on it for now. It also did not offer a prediction for how long the probe might last. The blast happened as Europe attempted to wean itself off Russian energy sources following the Kremlin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and contributed to tensions that followed the start of the war. The undersea explosions ruptured the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which was Russia's main natural gas supply route to Germany, until Russia cut off supplies at the end of August 2022. They also damaged the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which never entered service because Germany suspended the certification process shortly before Russia invaded Ukraine in February of that year. The explosions at the pipeline took place about 80 meters or 260 feet underwater on the ocean floor in the Baltic Sea. Seismic measurements indicate that the explosions occurred shortly before the leaks were discovered. Months after the detonations, there's no accepted explanation. A series of unconfirmed reports variously accusing Russia, the United States, and Ukraine are filling an information vacuum as investigations into the blast continue. Russia has accused the U.S. of staging the explosions, which they have described as a terror attack. The U.S. has denied involvement. The pipelines were a long target of criticism by the United States and some of its allies, who warned that they pose a risk to Europe's energy security by increasing dependence on Russian gas, which did happen. There was an energy crisis after this pipeline was shut off. In March 2023, German media reported that pro-Ukraine group was involved in the sabotage using a vessel and setting off the German port of Rostock. Ukraine rejected suggestions it might have ordered the attack, and German officials voiced caution over the accusation. Swedish prosecutors earlier hinted that the identity of the perpetrator was likely to remain unclear. Beyond their geopolitical impact, the Nord Stream pipeline leaks were a huge environmental disaster, with local wildlife affected and huge volumes of methane discharged into the Baltic Sea, in what analysts believe could be the single largest release of methane due to human activity. So not only was it a economic attack, but also an environmental attack. Probably not intended, but whoever did it probably feels good that they're getting away with it. It's not like if it was a state who did it, they're going to take him to the International Justice Court and say, hey, you did a crime. I don't know. We'll see. We might never see who did the pipeline explosion. But Germany still has its case going, so maybe they'll find something out. That's my story on the Nord Stream. On to yours.
Okay, well, quick story on the economy. U.S. economy, anyway. This is from AP. Christopher Rugeber. Consumers are increasingly pushing back against price increases and winning. Inflation has changed the way Americans shop. Now the changes our consumer habits are helping bring down inflation. Fed up with prices that remain about 19% on average above where they were before the pandemic. Consumers are fighting back, and grocery stores are shifting away from name brands to store brand items, switching to discount stores and simply buying fewer items like snacks and gourmet foods. More Americans are buying used cars too, rather than new, forcing some dealers to provide discounts on new cars again. But the growing consumer pushback to what critics condemn as price gouging has been most evident with the food, as well as with consumer goods like paper towels and napkins. Recent months, consumers' resistance has led large food companies to respond by sharply lowering prices. I'm sorry, not lowering prices. They would never do that. by sharply slowing their price increases from their peaks in the past 3 years. This doesn't mean grocery prices will fall back to their levels of a few years ago, though with some items, including eggs, apples, and milk, which are locally produced, all of those usually, well, apples aren't, but definitely eggs and milk are. Prices are below their peaks, but the milder increases in food prices should help further cool inflation, which is down sharply from a peak in 9.1 to 2022. 9.1 in 2022 to 3.1%. Public frustration with prices, blah, 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 polls, something, something, criticism, idiots, yelling stuff. Consumer pushback against high prices suggests that many economists that inflation should further ease. That would make the bout of inflation markedly different from the deliberating price spikes of the 1970s, early 1980s, which took longer to defeat. When high inflation persists, and consumers often develop an inflationary psychology, ever-rising prices lead them to accelerate their purchase before costs rise further, a trend that can itself perpetuate inflation. And we're going to double back to the Russia, kind of important story, Russia-Ukraine conflict. And this is a story from Mother Jones that I had earlier, but I lost. The Smirnov affair. The MAGA Republicans are useful idiots for Russian intelligence. This is from David Korn and Mother Jones. In June 2028, businessman and fixer named Alexander Smirnov, who was also an FBI informant, passed his handler at the Bureau a potentially explosive tip. The owner of Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company, had told him that he had paid $5 million each to Joe Biden and son Hunter, so the elder Biden and then vice president would stop an investigation into the firm. Last year, the allegation became a key component of Republican effort to impeach the president. But according to federal prosecutors, it was all a lie. 9 days ago, Smirnov, an Israeli and American citizen who had worked in oligarchs over the years, had been a confidential FBI source for a decade. It was indicted for making false statements to federal investigators. Smirnov's indictment is a big deal. It blows up a huge chunk of the GOP's impeachment drive, but more importantly, his alleged phony accusation did not occur in a vacuum. It is part of a larger story of the rotten relationship between Russian intelligence and the Trump cosmos. A year before Smirnov dropped his presumably counterfeit dime on the Bidens, Rudy Giuliani, who at the time was Donald Trump's personal lawyer, took a trip to Ukraine that he publicly said it was for the purpose of digging up dirt on the Democratic presidential contender. Giuliani was particularly focused on the unfounded claim that Biden, as Veep, had orchestrated the firing of Ukrainian prosecutor and the probe in Burisma. Giuliani's agenda including pressing the Ukrainian government to launch investigations that could yield derogatory information about Biden. Those would be, of course, the basis for Trump's first impeachment. In the following months, Giuliani's endeavor was aided by Russian operatives spreading disinformation about the Bidens. In fact, Trump's own intelligence establishment, his Treasury Department, would later publicly declare that Russian agents were mounting an operation to discredit Biden to help Trump win election. It appears likely that Smirnov's supposedly false statement to the FBI were connected to his covert Kremlin campaign. According to the prosecutors in the Smirnov case, in 2023, he told the FBI he had been in touch with Russian officials. Later, during an interview with the FBI, after he was arrested, Smirnov admitted that officials associated with Russian intelligence had been involved with passing the story about Hunter, according to court filings. Add all this up, and it looks like Russia succeeded in inserting an explosive allegation, $10 million in secret payments to the Bidens into the MAGA bloodstream, and boosted the GOP's impeachment crusade against the president. In other words, the Republicans and all their comrades in Fox and right-wing media outlets that trumpeted Smirnov's allegation against the Bidens have been useful idiots for Moscow. The Smirnov case has generated plenty of headlines and has caused the leading Republicans impeachers, namely Reps James Comer and Jim Jordan, to look foolish. Well, more foolish. Downplaying the revelations about Smirnov, they still insist they have a case, but it's important to view the Smirnov affair in its wider context. Republicans and the MAGA have eagerly anticipated in Kremlin scheming to undermine Biden. The Moscow plot has been a matter of public record for years. In February 2020, intelligence official briefed House lawmakers that Moscow was interfering in the election to assist Trump's re-election. This briefing, of course, angered Trump, who had refused to acknowledge that the covert program authorized by Russian leader Vladimir Putin helped him win the White House, and he replaced the acting director of national intelligence. Much later, William E. Viana, director of National Counterintelligence Security Center, issued a statement declaring that Russia is using a range of measures to primarily denigrate former Vice President Biden. Some Kremlin-linked actors are also seeking to boost Trump's candidacy in social media and Russian television. That was related to Giuliani's in Denver. The NCSC statement noted that the pro-Russia Ukrainian parliamentarian named Andrei Derkach, son of former KGB official, was spreading claims about corruption to undermine Biden's candidacy in the Democratic Party. In September 2020, Derkach was sanctioned by the Trump's Treasury Department, which called him an active Russian agent for over a decade, and declared that he was on a group of Russia-linked election interference actors. Treasury said had maintained a close connection with the Russians' intelligence service that directly engaged in, sponsored, concealed, and otherwise been complicit in foreign interference in an attempt to undermine the upcoming 2020 U.S. presidential election. And who is working with Derkach to spread the false story of Joe Biden and blocked an investigation of Burisma? Giuliani. At one point, Derkach staged a press conference in Kiev and played secretly recorded tapes of Biden speaking by phone to former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. Derkach insisted the recordings reported Giuliani's allegations of Biden, yet the tapes revealed no misconduct. This was disinformation stunt. So you just play a tape of two people talking. Well, obviously, they're in a conspiracy to do something illegal. They can't just be talking. Ukrainians critical of Russia speculated that the tapes originated with Russian intelligence. Giuliani never expressed shame, I don't think he can, for hooking up with a Russian agent. He publicly admitted he was in touch with the Derkach and called him very helpful. He has said that Derkach has spoken. People that are planting false information are always going to be helpful. It was a bizarre situation. Giuliani once known as, he was never known as America's mayor. That's just horse shit. Wasn't cahoots with the Russians' covert operation. Every Republican of Fox News who amplified the Biden allegations who was peddling were Kremlin helpmates. When Giuliani helped make public contents, a laptop a Hunter left behind a computer repair shop in Delaware, conservative media seized the occasion to boost the false charges about Joe and Hunter Biden being spread by Russian operation. The laptop contained explosive material about Hunter, but its contents did not. As the New York Post and other right-wing falsely proved that conspiracy theory that Biden had intervened to protect Burisma. Yeah, your laptop has stuff on it that you don't want people to know. Shocking. Well, anyway, very long article. He had a lot of time in his hands to rehash a lot of stuff. But the gist of it, these congressional people are in cahoots, and I don't think they give a crap about their own national security.
No, there's what you would call a legally based conspiracy. Like, it's an actual, conspiracy happening. They're conspiring. So
yeah, well, they're not going to actively act like they're conspiring, because they're going to act like we're the congressional investigation team and getting to the bottom of this horrible thing that never happened. So, back to you.
All right. In our culture segment here, it's still Black History Month, just to remind you, and we're going to talk about Canadians. Black Canadians, right? Nobody ever talks about them. Americans always want to talk about themselves, or I guess people from the United States. Right. But there's also Black Canadians, and they are having a whole museum focusing on their history in war. The Black Canadian Soldiers. This is by Bill Graveland and the Canadian Press. Oral Virtue first met Newfoundland-based Canadian soldiers as a child growing up in Jamaica. never forgetting their friendliness, openness, and the way they spoke this funky foreign language. More than 5 decades later, Virtue, 61, recalls a lifetime of service as a soldier while viewing the Black History Month exhibition at the Military Museum in Calgary. It never left my heart. Up to this day, I can still remember seeing those first Canadians in Jamaica, Virtue said in an interview. They're so polite, so nice, but we can't understand a single word they're saying because they're speaking this funky foreign language, he said with a laugh. Memories of the maple leaf meshed with Virtue's family history and his innate love of all things military. His father served in the Second World War with Great Britain. Virtue and his family moved to Ontario, and Virtue eventually joined the Canadian Armed Forces, serving on deployments in Cyprus, Bosnia, and elsewhere in Europe before retiring in 2007 from the Lord Strathcona's Horse Armored Regiment. Wow. Armored Horses Regiment. That's cool. Virtue said that while everyone was supposed to serve as equals, shoulder to shoulder, he signed up with his eyes open wide as a black man. I wasn't blind to what was happening, Virtue said. I was definitely aware of the racism. When I joined, there were a couple of guys that were from the Caribbean. They talked to me about what I should expect. Their experience paved the way for me. Alan Ross, a volunteer researcher who curates the Black History Month exhibit, said the roots of military service for Black Canadians dates back 2 centuries. Helping the British fight off the Americans in the War of 1812, and assisting in stopping the rebellion in Upper Canada in 1837. Canada's first black physician, Anderson Abbott, served in the U.S. Civil War. He added, Abbott was also attending physician to U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. Ross said an underlying racism became glaringly obvious during the Boer Wars in South Africa from 1899 to 1902. A conflict that saw 7,000 Canadians volunteer for service alongside British forces. Ethnic soldiers, said Ross, were eager to enlist, but they were turned away, given the prevailing sentiment that they would not fight or would falter when their bullets started flying. Wait, you can't fight other black people? What, says the white people who have been fighting other white people for centuries. No, you black people are the only ones who will falter and not shoot your fellow black man. It's like, I don't know this guy, he's from South Africa. Like, what are you talking about? Freaking racists. Racists are crazy. Ethics, oh yeah, we already did that one. We first hear the term, it's a white man's war, in the Boer Wars, says Ross. As Canada's participation in conflict continued and discrimination marched in lockstep. Many black Canadians were turned away from serving the First World War, although they were eventually allowed in, not to fight, but to work in service roles. Wow, classic. An all-black battalion, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, was formed in Nova Scotia and was dispatched to France in 1917 to provide lumber for trenches, roads, and railways. In the Second World War, Air Force and Navy officials feared black soldiers would struggle aboard ships and planes. Because they have some sort of ancestral fear of ships now because they were transported in slave ships. So now it just ancestrally passes down. Oh, I can't get on a ship.
I think it's normal to be ships.
It's just a weirdly, I'm just saying, why are they saying black people would be scared of ships? If it's not that, Black people are going to be scared of ships. Why would they be any scared of ships than anyone else? Ross said acceptance was better in later conflicts in Korea, the Baltics, and Afghanistan. The will of the black Canadians to serve has remained strong throughout. Why did these men want to fight, said Ross. They wanted to say, we're Canadians as well. We're all in this together and we want to prove we are part of this greater group. Virtue said history in some ways still repeats itself. Female soldiers later experienced what black soldiers went through when it came to combat roles. When I was a CFB in Cornwallis, we had females in our platoon. They were promised combat roles, and not a single one of them got one, he said. Years later, I went to Europe and I came back, and they had the very first females inside our vehicles. They did end up having a very, very hard time, he added. Discrimination is discrimination. So, yeah, I don't know why people are like, oh, we need soldiers to fight, but we only want those specific ones over there. We don't care about you. I know there's this idea of the lowest common denominator and making your platoon is only as strong as the lowest member, but the fact that they don't even give them a chance to prove themselves and they're just like, no, you're not getting on our ship because you're black. You're not you're not serving in the Boer Wars because you might not shoot another black person. You know, like these reasons are not, they don't have any sense. They're just no sense. It's just racism. But there is your Black History Month, another covering Canadian soldiers and what they went throughout the years, trying to just prove that they were Canadian and being denied the ability to prove that they were Canadian, I guess, from their point of view. On to this day in history.
In more history, we'll go back even farther. This day in history on Mucking Fun Day. In 1802, on this day, Victor Hugo, a poet, novelist, and dramatist who was most important to the French Romantic writers, was born. In 1885, Berlin, West Africa Conference concluded. Well, speaking of conferences that are taking place, the major European countries having staked claims to their colonial expansion in Central Africa. So yeah, white people dividing up Africa. 1919, the U.S. Congress established Grand Canyon National Park in northwestern Arizona. 1928, American singer and pianist Fats Domino was born, who basically invented rock and roll. Well, his drummer had that backbeat. His drummer invented the backbeat. That's where you go. Fats Domino. Born 1928, he would be 96 today. 1929, Grand Teton National Park was established in Wyoming. In 1950, it was expanded to include most of Jackson Hole National Monument. Of course, Grand Teton means big boobs. 1951, American novelist James Jones published From Here to Eternity about the U.S. Army in Hawaii before 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor is later adapted to an Academy Award-winning movie. 1993, on this day, the World Trade Center in New York was bombed for the first time. In an act of terrorism, Islamic rebels were later convicted for the crime. 2012, national debates about racism and racial profiling ensued after Trayvon Martin, an unarmed African-American teenager returning from a convenience store in Sanford, Florida, was fatally shot by neighborhood watch volunteer George Zimmerman, who later successfully argued that he had acted in self-defense. But he was not, actually. He was just shooting some kid. Oh, let me have some kid for lunch today. Our featured event today, Napoleon escaped from Elba. Forced to abdicate as French emperor in 1814, Napoleon escaped. Napoleon Bonaparte, in case you were thinking of a different one, escaped from an exile on the island of Elba this day in 1815 and gathered support en route, retook power and is returned to Paris on March 20th. It took him like less than a month to retake power. And then he went back to starting more war. I think the war is still going on. The Napoleonic Wars, he had 100 days, basically, because it says, ushering in the 100 days. Our feature biography, Johnny Cash. Man in Black was born on February 26, 1936. Kingsland, Arkansas, just south of Memphis. Well, southwest of Memphis. September 12th, 2023, he died in Nashville. On 2003, he died in Nashville, Tennessee. And what days is it today? Today is National Pistachio Day, so I love me some pistachios. Can't eat enough of those. I'm not sure they're good or bad for you. I just know you can't stop eating them. National Tell a Fairy Tales Day. So get your kids together, tell a fairy tale, I guess. National Set an Good Example Day. So that's also good. And it's National Letter to an Elder Day. So if you still know how to write letters, send one to an elder and say, hey, I'm glad you're around. Those are your days for today.
Yeah, send Rog a bunch of letters.
2020. Huh?
I said send you a bunch of letters. Everyone send you letters. You're an elder.
Man, I'm old. And while I can still read. Those are dates for today, February 26, 2024 on the 4 Coffee.
All right. We'll expect those letters coming in, okay? We're not going to give you our address. You're just going to have to send them and hope he gets them. We'll see
What are the
you
messages?
tomorrow on Good News Tuesday for all the good stuff that's happening out there in the world. The positive news day. And here is your mic drop moment.
And in between the rodeo things, they asked me to set up and do 2 or 3 songs. So that was what I did. I did Folsom Prison Blues, which they thought was their song, you know. And I walked the line, ring, Hey Porter, Cry, Cry, Cry. And then the word got around on the grapevine that Johnny Cash was all right and that you ought to see him. So the requests started coming in from other prisoners all over the United States. And then the word got around. So I always wanted to record that, you know, to record a show. Because of the reaction I got, it was far and above anything I had ever had in my life. The complete explosion of noise and reaction that they gave me with every song. So then I came back the next year and played the prison again, the New Year's Day show. Came back again the 3rd year and did the show. And then I kept talking to my producers at Columbia about recording one of those shows. It was so exciting. I said that the people out there ought to share that, you know, and feel that excitement too. So a preacher friend, a friend of mine named Floyd Gressett set it up for us, and Lou Robin and a lot of other people involved at Folsom Prison. So we went into Folsom on February 11th, 1968, and recorded the show live.
Be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notify buttons, and follow our other channels, Toxic Alley, History of Gravy, and Scratchy Old Records.